Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International. If you'd like to support WoW Esports, be sure to check out the in-game Transmorpher Beacon or Horde or Alliance toys on sale now in the in-game shop or in the description below. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk right now is Ironic, Nagura, and Sours. While Battle for Champions riding high in the upper finals and they're done for the day, we'll see them more tomorrow, we got to see who's going to go up against them in the upper finals, as Team D and Buffalo Nerf Rogue are going to be going up against each other's Ironic. First game's going to be up here on King's Rest, a dungeon Buffalo Nerf Rogue has really just not been too solid on historically.
Yeah, we saw them actually last Eastern Cup lose to Battle for Champion, when Battle for Champion was kind of throwing the dungeon. They had, I believe, 10 deaths in the dungeon, and they still ended up winning that match over Buffalo Nerf Rogue. So we're going to have to see if they actually were able to make so many differences in their strategy and get a better time in this dungeon.
Yeah, so it's actually a time trial dungeon, and for the time trials they were second, so they were not actually that bad. So I do believe they actually changed up their strategy a little bit, not having this Fury Warrior anymore and actually playing more of a better comp, really.
Yeah, well, that's one thing we're definitely going to look at, because Team D's time trial performance not been so hot, and Buffalo Nerf Rogue is currently in the standings the 4th place team. So they're kind of on that bubble, especially with so many other teams really trying to vie to get into that land. So they need this one to continue advancing on and continue securing more points, Sours.
Yeah, but Team D was first in the other 2 dungeons, were they not? So,
sure.
Yeah.
Like, Team D didn't necessarily need to go as hard here in King's Rest to qualify to be a 2nd or 3rd or 1st seed. And, you know, once they were good enough, this is very common in past MDIs also, where you only have to go as hard as needed to make it to the broadcast itself. And then once you're on broadcast, it's a completely different game when you're head-to-head versus when you're time trialing offline with no one to compete with, you know.
Yeah, so I mean, entirely possible that we could see Team D coming out extremely strong on this one, and
hopefully.
I think in general, our hope is to make sure that we're not having a repeat of the bloodbath, because I'm sure Battle for Champions just enjoying being in that upper finals right now. They get to tune in and start seeing how the other teams are going to go compared to them on this one. And as we've seen, some of the very large aggression was kind of their downfall, and the downfall for their opponents as well, Nagura. And it kind of makes you wonder if we're going to see the same thing out of Team D, because they've copied so many Western strategies so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think Team D has been very solid so far, and even in Shrine. Shrine is also one of those dungeons that are very, very difficult, but even there, they just had a solid strategy, they had clean play, so I kind of believe in Team D also having a clean King's Rest, even though they did have a bad time trial time, but, you know, King's Rest.
It is King's Rest indeed, and one dungeon that is a foe to many and many pugs, and very well-formed groups here. But Team D with a dominant poll result here with 86% from Twitch chat, as we are going in to King's Rest in Game 1 between Buffalo Nerf Rogue and Team D.
All right, so King's Rest. Let's hope there's no one flying in the air or flying down an edge this time around, as we see both of those teams, of course, running the same composition here. We're probably going to see the same thing out of both teams at the start here, with the Shroud coming out, where they just straight go into the first boss room and try to deal with that trash there.
Yeah, you know, as they're both doing this similar skip throughout the trash to spawn the first boss room at trash. I believe the time of that bloodbath we had earlier, the final dungeon time was about 37.5 minutes, and looking at my my time trial sheet here, Team D's time was 37 minutes and 20 seconds. So let's hope they have a little bit of a better actual practice time than that, as we see both of these teams instantly proccing, dispelling those first minions of Azules, and both of them actually
all 4.
Team D pulling all 4, and both teams going for a huge pull here. Team D did pull all 4, just like Battle for Champion did, but we've seen them do this pull in the past. We saw them do it the first week and pull it off incredibly cleanly, so we'll have to see if they're able to pull it off better than Team Battle for Champion did.
Okay, so Team D popping their bloodlust here, pulling all 4 mobs. We see the Warrior actually go back, line of siding to kite some of those mobs, and we see a perfect Ring of Peace here coming out as well to get rid of those, to kite them pretty much, to give the Warrior more room to not get hit by any of those very dangerous mobs, as we see. Those casters, of course, the Witch Doctors, if there's any spells going through on top of having a Quaking or something, it can be very, very dangerous and very deadly.
Yeah, but obviously, once again, Team D, we know this team is so clean, so good throughout these dungeons. I mean, we don't really expect them to mess up that much. They're so good at doing these huge pulls. It seems like there's so much more practice than these other teams. And if they're able to pull this off, which they should with just both of these 2 buffed champions left, they should be perfectly fine. I mean, part of the biggest problem with that pull is there's so much magic damage, and in addition to all of the physical damage that the Warrior tank is able to dodge and mitigate, is if they don't get enough of those interrupts out of their classes, the tank will just go down instantly. So we saw them perfectly dealing with that as they move into the first boss, the Golden Serpent here.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how Team D actually is doing so well, especially in this very first pull, while the other teams struggled so much compared to Team D. Well, Team D, as you mentioned, they just had such a bad time in the time trials. So maybe there's a reason why they had such a bad time. Maybe they are actually planning on doing those super huge pulls, and maybe they messed them up because they only have 5 tries in the time trials, right? Maybe they messed all their pulls up, or maybe there was something different. Maybe they just didn't want to show their strategy, or they didn't want to show how fast they can be in King's Chess, and did it on purpose so slowly. We will see later on. But yeah, Team D and both Bathrogue, of course, fighting the first boss here with their first Reaping Wave. Now this boss on Tyrannical is pretty dangerous.
Yeah, well, the other reason I could think of is maybe they just didn't want to play at 6 in the morning, but we'll actually never know that. Yeah, we keep talking about how dangerous this King's Rest Quaking affix is. It's because on this Tyrannical setting, especially this first boss, the Golden Serpent, there is so much single target damage going out on these players. Every single time you cast that Spit Gold debuff on a player, every single tick of that gold does about 50 to 60% of your health, depending on your class and your passive mitigation from versatility and avoidance. So if you get that 50% damage tick in addition to a Quaking tick, you're taking 70 to 80% of your health at once. And if you're not topped off, you're going to die or proc a cheat death, and that's just one more defensive you don't have rest for the rest of the fight.
Yeah, Quaking definitely can be very risky, especially if it happens in a bad time, right? Maybe that's why we see those tree forms coming out of the healers from this region, just because of this Quaking, right? Because whenever you don't have tree form, the only instant heal you really have as a Resolute is Swiftman, and otherwise you can't really do anything because you can't be casting Regrowth if the Quaking is coming out, right? Because it will get interrupted. So with this tree form, when you have those instant Regrowth casts, maybe that's one reason. Oh no, I think... Oh, okay, never mind. My bad.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, we even see the Vivifies coming out when it's on the monk, healing himself just to make sure they're able to get through it. We see the Rogue dropping incredibly low to 7% with the Quaking coming out. He does end up proccing his cheat death there. That's just one of the examples of how difficult it is to live through that debuff in addition to the Quaking on this fight. You want to have that cheat death available for another 6 minutes now. But, I mean, that's the thing. This is so much single target damage on players, and it requires the healer to react so much just to that damage. And this actually puts in an even higher skill cap on the healer's job in this fight, because if you're able to actually swap into cap form and do extra DPS when you don't have to do any healing, that just shows how good of a player you are with your healing management and your mana management. And
definitely. We see Ev, of course, dropping very low there, and sorry about that. I thought one of the golds reached the boss for a second there. That would have been, of course, a disaster, because if a gold reaches the boss, you will get an absorb shield, but also do increased damage. So it basically means that you're going to wipe. So that would have been a disaster, but of course, didn't happen for either of those teams, as Team D reaches 10%, while Buff War and Nerf Rogue are on 25%. So I think it's only the difference from the trash pull, because of course Team D had a faster trash pull compared to Buff War Nerf Rogue, and that's why they also pulled the boss earlier, therefore being faster. But Buff War Nerf Rogue not that far behind at all, actually. They're doing pretty well.
Yeah, they're pretty much doing essentially the same damage to the boss. The only major difference here being that Team D pulled the boss maybe 20-ish seconds earlier, which kind of makes you wonder, right, in this Tyrannical affix, if you're not going to pull the entire trash room, why would you use your lust there? Wouldn't you want to use your lust on the more difficult portion of the instance, which is going to be that boss encounter? But I mean, once again, they're dealing with both of them fine. They ended up not having to use their bloodlust on the boss at all. They're dealing with it just perfectly fine with no deaths. So it looks like it's going to be just fine for them. Yeah,
on Team D side, they're onto this gauntlet where you get the trash spawn after you killed a pack, a new one will spawn. On the tournament realm, it will always be top left first and then go counterclockwise. Now, we did see the Resolute be missing for a while, so I assume he went back and pulled those 2 constructs that we've seen most teams pull so far. Now, we saw some disasters earlier where the tank and other people actually got hit by the construct stun, but Team D dodging it so far, so let's hope for a good run here.
Yeah, of course, the most dangerous part of that construct, like you mentioned, is that huge frontal AoE. It kind of chooses a wedge in front of it, shows sparkles on the ground where it's going to be, and then they'll wind up their slam and hit the ground, dealing a large amount of damage to everyone hit, and it will also stun you, so it's definitely a double whammy. You don't want to get hit by that. But the thing about pulling those 2 constructs, or those 2 guardians rather, into this pull is it always gives you something to hit, right? There's a lot of downtime in this room where you're waiting for the next trash pack to spawn. So for these first 2 or 3 trash packs, you're able to make sure you're always hitting something, make sure you're always contributing towards the end of the dungeon.
Yeah, we see Buff Warrior and Nerf Rogue do the same thing, also having those two constructs up. Now they are a little bit behind because, of course, they killed the boss later, but they're not doing so bad at all. If we compare it to the last King's Quest we've seen, we had like 12 deaths or something already at this time. So definitely both teams having pretty clean runs so far. And as they are on the second pack here on Team D side, now we saw the knockback coming out to interrupt this lightning AoE basically. And they have a bunch of knockbacks to deal with it as the Ring of Peace works and the Typhoon works as well.
Yeah, of course, but the more dangerous mechanic of this trash pack that we always keep going back to every single time is going to be that Axe Barrage cast coming out of the guard captain here. It does a massive amount of physical damage to everyone in the group. But the thing is, on this tyrannical affix, it doesn't really do that much to the team, so it's not really going to be that big of a deal.
Yeah, definitely. And one more thing to mention here, again, Team D was the team that played DK for literally every single dungeon and every single cup and time trial dungeon last time around in the first cup. But now Team D actually switched to their Windwalker. So the DK switched to their Windwalker, pretty much improving their damage or improving their comp. And he's been doing a really good job so far. It's not we see Long actually dropping very low, but they might be able to recover here as he gets a shield on top of... Okay, he's fine at this point. But as I mentioned, the DK switched to Windwalker. I feel like it definitely helps them, not only comp-wise, but also just having this physical buff for everybody. And they also have the DK in the back pocket whenever they choose to bring it out.
Yeah, we saw everybody drop on the side of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue dropping incredibly low during that Reaping pack, but they were unfortunately able to get out of it with pretty much no big deal. The tank did end up proccing his cheat death trinket, so we won't have that available for another 8 minutes, but both of the rogues still have their cheat death available to them. But, I mean, we're looking at the comparison between the two teams here. I mean, Team D is really only just percentages ahead on these trash pulls here. They're not really that far ahead, so we'll have to see what major differences in pulls they're going to do later on in the dungeon, or just, it might not even be differences in pulls, it might just be differences in execution. But, I mean, I feel like I want more of that from Team D. We've been kind of hyping them up to be this team that can compete with the best teams in the West, and if they're just doing the same old boring pulls as any other team, what really sets them apart?
I mean, at this point, you have to give the credit to Team D that there wasn't really anything special you can do at the start of King's Quest, because it's a very linear dungeon, and here, especially in this gauntlet, there's not very much you can do on top of pulling the two constructs. So maybe we can see something later on. But yeah, King's Quest is just one of these dungeons that are pretty straightforward. The only like huge difference we've seen from teams so far was some teams actually pulled the construct on the bridge to get the percentage, and other teams kind of did this method EU strategy where they would double CC mobs in the very last pack and kill the rest of the pack, and then just shadow meld it to get the exact percentage that they needed, which is the most efficient thing in my opinion. So what I would like to see Team D doing here is pretty much do the same thing as Method EU and just have this double CC at the very end of the dungeon.
Yeah, of course, and the first thing we'd want to see them do, of course, if we're going that route, is pull everything in the Embalmer's room here, all of the slimes plus the two constructs at the same time. That's a little bit dangerous, but I feel like for a team the caliber of Team D, they should definitely be able to pull that kind of pull off.
Definitely. We see Lung obviously having the speed buff here, just gathering all those blobs. And we mentioned before, this is pretty dangerous because of the explosive, but rogues are just very good at dealing with them. I'm not sure if they pulled the construct on purpose or if it was an accident, but they definitely have to deal with the construct now on top of all the blobs as well, and all the explosives. Now, rogues are very good at killing the explosive because they can cleave off of it with Blade Flare, which barely anyone else can do. We see Lung leaping over there to get someone out of the entomb, and we see App actually pulling the other construct as well. So it seems like it was intentional, but that can be very dangerous.
Yeah, this is exactly, I mean, like I mentioned, this is exactly what I wanted to see out of them. I want to see the full extent of their abilities as players here. I don't want to see them kind of, you know, doing sort of half the pulls they can do, even knowing they can win doing that. I want to see them go all out and do all they can do, and this is exactly what we want to see from them. One of the constructs goes down, so the real dangerous part of this trash pull, where both constructs are alive and you can get double entombs, is gone. But now they can just kind of cleave this Reaping down with this last construct. Yeah,
I like this a lot, and Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue actually doing exactly the same thing. So I'm really impressed by Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue at this point, because, you know, Team D, we've been hyping them up. They're the number one seed from the last tournament, and they've been just having those super good strategies, super clean runs. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue just keeping up with Team D here, and not very far behind at all, and doing also like those huge pulls and those risky strategies. So definitely looking out for Buff Warrior here as well.
Yep, and once both of those constructs go down, of course, Machumba, the Embalmer, does spawn as the second boss in the instance, and he kind of just echoes the mechanics of those two constructs. He'll occasionally entomb one of the players in one of these four sarcophagi around the room, and you'll have to break the person out by running over and clicking it. So he's kind of one of those big, long patchwork bosses where he doesn't really have too much of the ability to kill players. It's just how quickly can you get through the boss. Now, something interesting I want to see out of Team D here is whether or not they plan on using their Bloodlust on this boss, because we've seen most teams that plan on getting through the dungeons quicker use their Bloodlust on a big trash pull right after the boss, because like I mentioned just now, this boss isn't necessarily that dangerous in terms of mechanics, whereas the trash right afterwards is.
Yeah, so Buff War actually chooses to use their Bloodlust. They did the pull a little bit differently, so they killed both of the constructs at the very same time to proc the Reaping, pull the Reaping on top of the boss and use their Bloodlust. Now Team D actually had to waste a little bit of time to get out of combat because they were playing the Reaping with the last construct still alive, and then when the construct died, they still had some of the Reaping mobs left, and they chose to finish up the Reaping mobs before pulling the boss to actually get out of combat. Now I do think they lost a little bit of time there, as Buff War Nerf Rogue just has the Reaping on top of the boss, has the Bloodlust so they can catch up on boss DPS there. But as you said, if Team D actually has a bigger trash pull later on, it's going to be all worth it for them.
Well, we said, yeah, like you mentioned, the trash pull is a little bit different. Buff War Nerf Rogue opted to pull some of that last Reaping trash into the boss and cleave it down with the Bloodlust. So their Bloodlust in terms of boss single target DPS really wasn't that efficient, which is why they're behind on boss damage right now behind Team D, even though they pulled the boss at roughly the same time. So we're definitely going to see Team D, I believe, use that Bloodlust on a huge trash pull right after this boss, and that's pretty much going to make or break the dungeon for them. Now, the thing about using that Bloodlust, 3 or so minutes later is it doesn't really affect your Bloodlust timing later on in the dungeon, because you will still have that third Bloodlust later up for the most difficult portion of the fight of the fourth boss encounter.
Yeah, so we see Team D just being slightly ahead in boss percentage here. Now, when it comes to the mechanics of this boss, nothing very dangerous. The only thing you really gotta watch out for is that you don't cut the room in half, basically, by the fires. The fires do spawn on top of a player, so that's why you see the tank pulling the boss into certain areas. So as you can see, the fire spawning right now on Team D side, so it's not in the middle of the room, or it doesn't split the room in half. So definitely very good positioning coming out of Team D here.
And of course, one other thing to mention, if they do plan on doing a massive pull right after the boss, they're not going to be using their second set of cooldowns on the boss. They're going to be saving it for that trash pack. So we might see the boss DPS for Team D slow down a little bit here, while Buff War Nerf Rogues might go up a little bit, unless Buff War Nerf Rogue also plans on doing that big pull as well, just without the Bloodlust. So we'll have to keep an eye on the boss damage here. As Buff War Nerf Rogue does they're kind of pulling even. They were a little bit behind before that, but they're pulling up pretty neck and neck with them right here.
Yeah, so this huge trash pull that we've seen, that you've mentioned, that we have seen from the Western region, where they basically will pull double Berserkers or two groups on top of each other while having two casters as well. Most teams have been saving their Bloodlust for it, so if Buff War or Nerf Rogue actually chooses to do that pull without Bloodlust, that's going to be very risky for them, because we've seen one team actually do it before, and it was Method NA. And Method NA actually had explosives go off, and they had almost a team wipe coming in just because they were missing the Bloodlust. So now we'll see what they choose to do, both of those teams.
Yeah, both of these teams moving up to this incredibly dangerous trash gauntlets here. I feel like what's going to happen here is pretty much going to make or break the dungeon. We're going to see similar large pulls coming out of both teams, maybe even more coming out of the side of Team D, as Bloodlust is popped on that double Berserker pack. They are doing the same size pull, so nothing too crazy out of Team D. They just have that extra precautionary, tail of, they have that Bloodlust to help them get through this trash pack that much more quicker, more healing on the tank. They have everything available to them as well. They have the Cheat Death Trinket on the tank as well as both Cheat Deaths on the Rogue. And we do see, without the Bloodlust, Ching going down on this incredibly dangerous pull to that bleed from the Berserker. And on top of that, his Cheat Death Trinket did proc, so he doesn't have that available anymore.
Yeah, this is what I've been talking about. Just this one pull is so dangerous without the Bloodlust coming in. And we see one more death here from the Windwalker. Loda dropping very, very low. He did manage to recover here and heal himself up. They do have a battle rest available, so they could get him back up, as there's still two Berserkers alive and the Witch Doctor alive. So this is still very dangerous. So we can see the battle rest coming out, and this is the exact reason why they should be saving their Bloodlust for this exact pull. As I mentioned, Method NA having the same problems exactly in this pull, and the second time they played the King's Rest, they were actually saving the Bloodlust as well. So Buff War, Nerf Rogue definitely having the wrong decision here to use the Bloodlust on the boss.
And they were able to sort of restabilize there, but it cost them both of their active battle reses. It cost them the Cheat Death Trinket on the tank, plus one of the Cheat Deaths for the Rogues. In addition to that, they're almost, 2/3 of a trash pack pulled behind Team D now. And they didn't really gain anything from using that Bloodlust on the boss, too. So you got to wonder if that's just bad routing for them, or if they're not comfortable not using Bloodlust on that boss. We'll have to, we can only speculate, but it definitely wasn't the right play this time around.
Yeah, most definitely not. We see Team D, of course, already being in this next trash bag. The Brute already being very low HP. Well, Buffalo and Nerf Rogue actually didn't lose that much time from losing those two players. Of course, you do have the 10-second difference as they actually get cleaved by the Raptor here and almost died on Buffalo and Nerf Rogue side. Definitely got to watch out for the Raptors, especially if you're a full melee group and you're all stacked in the same position. If one Raptor jumps in and just cleaves the whole group, you definitely got to watch out for that one.
Now, we've mentioned once again, this is a huge trash gauntlet. There's so much going on here. As Baby Pig on the side of Team D drops incredibly low, he has that Berserker bleed on him, but he's able to live through it no problem without even proccing the cheat death. Very impressive. I wonder if he's running Dwarf in this dungeon. We'll have to find out, and he was able to remove that bleed. But still, heads up play from them as everyone's dropping incredibly low, and Lung does go down here, as well as Baby Pig proccing his cheat death. He's dead as well. 2 deaths on the side of their team. They are able to battle res the tank. They might be able to save this pull if they're able to get Baby Pig up as well, but we'll have to see from them as they go on. They have so much reaping going on here from them.
We have a full wipe on Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue coming in as the 3 players die. We do see 1 Rogue managing to probably vanish, but yeah, disaster for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue for both teams, just having such a huge problem with this pull here as they pull a Berserker, a caster, and a Reaping on top of each other. We see Team D also just struggling. AB has to somehow try to survive to get a Shadow Melt off or something like that so he can rest everybody and not lose too much time. But both teams, just a disaster pull for both, coming in, just having full team wipes on both sides.
It looks like he was able to get the Shadow Melt off, so he will be able to run back up and res his team instead of having to run back. So that's going to be a huge time save on their side. Ooh, he actually did not get the Shadow Melt off for this one Reaping Mob, so he will have to run back with the rest of the team. That's incredibly unfortunate. Like, something we haven't mentioned today, of course, with these Reaping Mobs is that their aggro radius is immense. Like, we're talking 40 to 50 yards. So if you're anywhere in the ballpark of these guys, you're going to get an aggro. But we have to mention, like, these teams are neck and neck. They both full wiped at the exact same point in the dungeon. Both teams will have to actually skip all the way back to where they were. And then they'll have to kind of recompose themselves and keep going in the dungeon. Now, they are able to watch this, watch a VOD of the stream kind of on a little bit of a delay, so they'll know that the other team also wiped. So we're gonna see them just going just as hard as they were, pretty much. Like, they aren't stopping at all here.
Now, Buffalo Nerf Rogue actually had a very smart decision here to only have the Resto Druid released, but the Resto Druid didn't actually walk all the way up, because it's so good for them to actually remember that the Reaping Souls are going to be there. So if the Resto Druid would have walked up the stairs, he would have aggroed the Reaping Mobs, and he wouldn't have been able to use the rest. So he stopped in the second boss room, used the Master Rest there, and now that he has the whole team alive to deal with those Reaping Mobs on the other side. Team D had everybody released, and now they're going to have to waste all the time to get everyone through. Of course, needs a Shroud again to skip those mobs that they skipped before.
Yeah, and of course they do have both of those Shrouds up. If they didn't have both of those Shrouds, they would have had to use either a Shadow Meld or a Death Skip of some sort to get past this mob. Fortunately, both Shrouds up, so they're able to skip all the way back to where they were in the dungeon. But you already see on the side, because of the choice that Buff or Nerf Rogue with only their Druid rezzing, they're able to, move on to the rest of the dungeon. We do see, by the way, that the tank did get in combat with the Construct, so he is going to have to die and get rezzed here.
Yeah, so we see the beam coming through here as well. Now this beam from this Construct actually is a really long range, and it might hit through the wall as well. So they gotta watch out here as they're in combat with this big Reaping Construct here. And the tank, of course, died. So we see the beam debuff also on the whole team just going through, because it goes through the walls, as I mentioned. Thankfully, the healer app managed to survive, so you can use the Masters here to get them up, but they're just losing so much time from this swipe here. So much more time than Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue are already in the next trash pool. They do have a death coming in, but they have a Battle Rest to get him back up. And they're on this pretty much last trash pool. This is the last pull they have to do, and then they only have to kill a mini boss later on, and they will have 100%.
So let's take a look at the state of the dungeon here. Kind of just full stop, take a sec, sit back and look at everything here. Both teams had a full wipe. Both of their death counters are pretty high here. Oh, actually, we see them dropping once again incredibly low on the side of Buff or Nerf Rogue. Tomboy does go down yet again, so he won't be up for the rest of this pull. And I mean, if they aren't able to stabilize here, it could be another full wipe out of them. We'll have to keep an eye. But because of that death, and it looks like he actually released as well, so he's going to have to run back through the entire dungeon. Because of that death, it's going to let Team D back into the dungeon. Yeah,
definitely. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue were actually ahead at this point, but having the death come in now, these pulls are very risky, because there's so many dangerous mobs here that can kill you very easily. There's explosives everywhere. As we see the poison on Loda here, that probably doesn't have a dispel ready to get it off of him because more than one person got hit by it. We have the Berserkers putting those blades, we have the Beastmasters, we have Raptors jumping around, we have a Hex cast coming in. We see Loda actually going down here again. This means he will either he has to release or the rest of the team has to finish up the mob so the Windwalker can get the rest up. But yeah, Team D on the other hand, doing this pull a lot better than before in Nerf Rogue. They're doing the exact same pull, and so far it looks very stable on their side.
He ran right past the explosive that killed him. He was at 26% health. He ran right past that explosive, and to add insult to injury, the monk gets his resurrection cast interrupted in the last like 0.5 seconds of the cast, so they have to wait for another 8 seconds for him to res here. This is just, they were ahead, like we mentioned, they were ahead from the full team wipe, and now they're, just because of all these tiny little mistakes, they're pretty far behind now.
Yeah, we definitely have to mention how difficult these affixes are. King's Rest definitely one of the most difficult dungeons in a tyrannical settings. We all know that from live servers, right? As soon as they have tyrannical, King's Rest becomes very, very difficult. And now on top of that, we have explosive, which makes a bunch of those trash pulls just dangerous because the mobs are jumping around, Raptors jumping here, casters there, and then the explosives are spread out. So for a full melee group, it's very difficult to deal with all the explosives spawning so spread out around the room. And on top of that, you have quaking. Now quaking is something that people usually are not super afraid of, but in a tyrannical King's Rest, if you have those dangerous spells like we can see on Team D side here, the debuffs on Ab right now, if you get a bad quaking on top of that, we see Loom probably gonna die. They do have a battle rest, so they should be able to get him back up. It should not be a problem for them here. But yeah, Loom actually got hit by one of those whirling blades on the floor, and he died.
And we see Ab, we seem to have a little bit of an observing connection error as we do get a good view of what's going on here. Loom did go down, but it looks like they used the battle res on him, but he wasn't able to take it. I'm curious to see what happened there. But we should look at the side of Buff 4 Nerf Rogue here, where they're kind of catching up. They're getting to the rest of the trash here, and they're kind of catching up. They're about to start pulling the boss here as well as they skip the rest of these Berserkers. But we do see Tomboy going down to that bleed debuff from the Berserker, which was not properly CC'd. And they're going to have to res him up. That's just another death on the board for them here. Yeah,
this is the kind of method EU skip I've been talking about earlier, where you do pull 2 trash packs together, but you see one Berserker and you see one Witch Doctor, so you pretty much have to deal with 2 less mobs, and then once you killed the rest of the mobs, you just go past into the boss room and then you shut them out, having this exact 96% enemy forces that you do need to finish up the dungeon. Of course, you get the last percent from the mini-boss later on that you will have to kill, no matter what else, you're not going to be able to reach the last boss. Now, before Nerf Rogue, of course, caught up as Team D has this full team wipe coming in. Now, this boss is pretty difficult if you get hit by those swirling blades. You can see that are on the floor. And on top of that, you also have this very crucial bleed debuff from Kula that is a 20 seconds dot that just does an insane amount of damage.
And we do see everyone is now rezzed up fully on the side of Team D here as they get ready to repull the Council boss. Only about, half of one of those 3 bosses' health behind, so they're not far behind at all. As we have seen in the past, Team D's single target boss damage seems to be pretty much heads and shoulders above other teams just because of player skill. Now, of course, the most dangerous, difficult mechanic for Kula the Butcher of this first boss is going to be that Severing Axe cast, which is a heavy, heavy physical bleed debuff that it puts on one single target. Now, usually we'll see both of the rogues in the team opt to go for a dwarf racial instead of the typical night elf because they don't need that shadow meld to pull off skips. They can just use the rogue vanish instead. And what that dwarf racial allows you to do is remove a bleed from yourself. So if they get that nasty Severing Axe debuff, they can just pop the dwarf racial and the bleed is gone.
Yeah, unfortunately, Tomboyo is Night Elf on Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue side, and he did get the Severing Axe on him, so he wasn't able to use the Dwarf racial. Now, I do believe the other Rogue is Dwarf, so unfortunate that they didn't get it on him. But they're about to kill Kula here as Team D is on 27%, and they did catch up quite a bit on boss damage, as you mentioned. Just Team D having so much single target damage. Now, they're definitely not out of the race here. The deaths are pretty much equal, so it's 11 to 12, meaning that the difference in time is not huge at all. It's 5 seconds advantage for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue here. Both of those teams, of course, have their bloodlust available, which they will be saving for the boss later. And we see actually a dangerous quaking coming in for Team D side as Ep had the Severing Axe plus the quaking, but he did manage to heal himself up.
Yeah, of course, the most dangerous person for that Severing Axe to go on is probably going to be the healer because he has the least defensive out of anyone in the group to deal with that debuff, although he can just, heal himself through everything. Now, we kind of talked a lot about quaking in this dungeon, but not so much about that explosive affix, because the quaking is guaranteed damage, right? You cannot, you have to take the quaking damage pretty much, but explosive, you can at least kill the explosive orbs. Now, Zanazal, of course, as we've mentioned many times, he'll spawn these 4 totems around the room as his major ability. The biggest problem for this fight on the explosive affix is that explosive can spawn on the totems, so we see teams making this play where they'll actually spread out all 4 of their non-tank players to each of the totems just to make sure they can deal with that explosive affix.
Yeah, I think we actually saw Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue do that just then, so definitely very good strategy coming in by them to make sure just to be safe, really, because you can get very unlucky with explosives. Explosives are RNG after all. Now, obviously, the more mobs there are, the more mobs you're fighting currently, the more chances of a lot of explosives spawning. If there's only one mob or one boss, then you're going to get a lot less explosives, of course, than if there's lots of targets. So therefore, you can get unlucky when the totems are up. You can have 2 or even 3 spawn on the totems, and then you're going to be in trouble because you have a full melee lineup. You can't really deal with them unless they're walking over there. So that's why we see the split coming out from both of those groups. So very well done by them. As Team D, still 10% behind on the boss damage, but they're constantly catching up.
And they're making an interesting call here just to opt for more boss damage. They're completely ignoring that Thundering Totem, because the only thing the Thundering Totem does is it interrupts everyone in the group at the end of its Thundering Crash Cast. This doesn't really do much in terms of DPS for the players in the group as they drop incredibly low to Quaking plus an explosive going off, but it looks like they're going to be just fine. That was incredibly scary for the Monk player there, but just barely able to survive. But like we mentioned, that Thundering Totem doesn't really do anything to the group, so it was an interesting call by them to not kill that totem.
Definitely. Sometimes we also see just the Rastud or the healer just finishing off those totems that don't really do anything for the group. Now the Torrent totem that will spawn those swirlers on the ground is usually also not very dangerous for a full melee group because they don't really lose damage from walking out of those swirlies. Now if you have a ranged DPS, you obviously want to deal with it so the range doesn't have to constantly move around. But having a full melee group, just letting the healer finish it off is totally fine. Now on Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue side, they are 50% on Akali, the last boss here. This boss doesn't really do much at all. The only thing that you have to watch out for is the barrel throw. Now they can just last second vanish it if it's on a rogue and just delay the cast constantly, because while he casts the barrel through, he doesn't really do anything else. As you see, actually not using the vanish and the heal ended up being very low because not everyone soaked it.
Something that Team D is better at doing than every other team I've seen in this tournament pull this boss, they have a very particular way they do this boss, which lets them do more damage to Akali the Conqueror than any other group. Now the main 2 mechanics for Akali are the barrel through cast and the debilitating backhand. Now the problem with debilitating backhand is it causes your tank to have to kite the boss around because he takes increased damage from the boss. But if you're able to mess with the boss's ability queuing and make it so he casts barrel through after debilitating backhand, your tank can stay in for the full duration of that debuff and DPS the boss down.
Oh no.
Now, when they pulled this boss, oh man, we see 3 deaths on the side of Team D here. Now maybe, just maybe, the Rogue and the tank will be able to deal with this boss. They're going to have to pull some interesting stuff with the next barrel through. Hopefully they have one of those vanishes left, but if they don't, they're going to be in a world of hurt here, and this might be the end of the dungeon for them.
Yeah, definitely. This is going to be over. They're not going to be able to finish this up as the Quaking comes in. We see the tank just being so low on HP, the barrel through actually getting dodged or evasion by Moxa, so but there's still just too much damage. The tank goes down, and 5%, maybe with the evasion he's going to be able to finish it up, but now he needs to kite, and he needs to get the interrupt too as he gets it there, and the explosive going up as well, and now the backhand. Maybe if we can kite it out. No way. He needed to manage to just stay alive because there was no way of him to finish it off. But now, of course, he can't be resting, so everyone needs to release again. This is just a disaster for Team D, especially because of this boss. It just lasts so long. This boss having 3 different council fights is taking so much time on a tyrannical setting. So this is a disaster for Team D, wiping on the very last percentage. While Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is already in Shadow of Soul on the mini boss. So this is definitely Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue's game to win.
I mean, that was almost a hero moment for Mog there. Like,
yeah.
He was so close. He had the repost up for the barrel for the charge. He was able to completely repost that, but they just didn't have the survivability to live through just the boss damage. If the tank was maybe a little bit higher, maybe they could have finished the boss off, and they would have set that checkpoint at the boss, so they wouldn't be that far behind. But now they have to run all the way back through the dungeon. They have to repull all 3 bosses of that council again. Whereas Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, they've finished their 100% mob count. All they have to do is deal with the final boss, King Dazar.
Yeah, so they do have 1 battle rest available, so in case something goes wrong, they can still get a rest up. Of course, if Loda dies, they don't have a rest for him, so that would be the only difficulty on this fight. But generally speaking, on this spot, we don't see a lot of teams have deaths coming in. We did see, I think, 1 or 2 deaths earlier by another team, but that was mainly just because of bad quaking time. That's the only difficult. Oh, we see Tomboya actually dropping very low because he didn't move at all when he got to charge on him. He pretty much was just standing there waiting for the damage to happen. Now, if this leap is coming in and it's targeted you definitely want to constantly move, because depending on the impact point, you will get more damage. If you stand still completely like Tomboya did before, then you're going to get a lot of damage, and that's why he almost died. But this time he did manage to get the hook in.
I mean, if I was the leader of this team right now and I saw one of my players do that in this position, I'd be absolutely furious with them. When you're in this position, when you're in, you know, a neck-and-neck race with a team that's supposed to be a better team than you, that everyone hails as the best team in the region, and you have a chance to beat that team, you play it safe. They need to be playing as safe as they possibly can right now, moving as much as they can for every single one of these quaking leaps, making sure they're pulling all of their cooldowns for this next most dangerous portion of the fight at 60%. I mean, not moving for the quaking leap, that's just lazy.
It definitely is. And then we also saw 2 of those people get hit by the Gale Slash, by the tornadoes, as we can see, and another player getting hit by it, actually the tank and the rogue. Now, this Gale Slash is actually, I mean, it does your ticking damage. It doesn't straight up kill you if you get hit by it. But on top of just having the quaking and having other AoE abilities coming in here, it still might just kill you. So just them playing sloppy and getting hit by tornadoes, not dealing with the other abilities here properly, definitely something that is not nice to see, especially as you said, they're currently winning against the #1 team.
Yeah, and of course, Bloodlust popped. We mentioned this is the most dangerous portion of the fight. When Tazala comes out at 60%, you have to make sure you DPS down this Raptor as quickly as possible. It will cast that Deathly Roar cast, which will fear everyone in the group. And in these affixes, in this explosive quaking affix, if you take damage from quaking, if explosives happen to go off during that Deathly Roar, it can just wipe the group instantly. So you have to make sure that you're pooling all your cooldowns there, making sure you're DPSing down that bird as quickly as possible, just like we saw before Nerf Rogue there. And once you get past the Raptor part of the fight, it's just kind of a tank and spank. You have to make sure your tank doesn't die, and you just got to dodge the spears from the ceiling.
Yeah, one more thing to mention about quaking is it's actually a negative thing if you have a full melee group, of course, right? Because if you're melee, you need to be all kind of standing in the same spot because you all want to be hitting the same targets. So if you get the quaking as a full melee group, especially when your Resolute also wants to do damage, then you kind of need to spread out smart. Now, sometimes 2 people have the same idea. It's like, oh, I'm going to dodge to the left. And then another person has the same idea. Oh, I'm also going to dodge to the left. And then this is how it can happen that people get hit by double quaking or even triple quaking. So just having a strategy from these teams that probably they figured out before the dungeon, saying, hey guys, if we get a quaking, then you go this direction, you go this direction, you go this direction. So this is why we see the smart movement or smart spread out from this team coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to keep seeing safe play from them because they have 25% left on this boss. It's not over yet. You can still make mistakes by not moving out with your Quaking Leap. I like that we saw the Monk just run out and kind of just move away from it instead of trying to do something fancy like port back into the group. I mean, you can make a mistake. If you port too early and he Quaking Leaps right in the middle of the group, you're one-shotting everyone on your team and you're throwing a 1 dungeon. So making sure you're, just making smart plays, making sure you're not doing anything stupid. That's what I like to see from them. That one rogue mishap earlier where he didn't move for the Quaking Leap, you know what, that's fine as long as you deal with the boss and you keep that battle res here.
Yeah, we see Loda actually being very low on mana here at this point, but the boss is on 8%, and it should be okay for them to finish it well. As Loda actually get hit by one of those Gale Slashes with the Quaking, so he's dropping very, very low HP. But even if Loda goes down here, they should still be able to finish this off. And it's buff for a Nerf Rogue who actually wins this King's Stress, but both teams actually struggling quite a lot.
Yeah, buff war Nerf Rogue definitely beat Team D here, but I have to say that I think King's Rest definitely beat both of these teams more.
Sometimes it's just the dungeon that is the real winner here as Buff or Nerf Rogue gets to the finish first, taking game 1 in the series here. And that, again, once again, we'd love to see it, we hate to see it. King's Rest has truly been a tall order for these teams to take on Sours.
Yeah, we were joking around of like before this day even started that maybe Team D just kind of did really poorly in this map in time trials so they could sleep in a little bit at the start of the day, but we can see very quickly that that is not really the case. The dungeon was so close all the way up until the second boss. Machimba dies at like the exact same time for both teams, and then everything kind of fell apart for everybody. It was a complete disaster. Clown Fiesta, crabs in the chat, F's in the chat. It was a rough dungeon from there on out. All the trash after the second boss, it's a very common theme in a lot of dungeons where trash just gets harder the deeper and deeper you go into a dungeon. And it was rough for both of these teams to overcome that boss 2-3 hurdle.
You really just saw a lot of run back time, a lot of the checkpoint or lack thereof really causing a struggle for them as we went into this one. Is ironic, and just didn't seem like they were able to get back in enough, get their cooldowns ready, and start taking it on.
Yeah, I mean, seeing these teams both continue to feed after a full wipe is like you have to have some complexion in the dungeon. You have to be able to pull yourself back together after a wipe and be like, okay, we've practiced this dungeon like 50 times before. We know what we're doing in here. We can't keep feeding to the same mechanics. But neither of the teams seem to find that, you know, that safe spot, like where they knew what they were doing for the rest of the dungeon after that first wipe.
It's almost kind of like whenever you're running live keys, then you know that your team's depleted the run, so everyone just kind of starts playing just a little bit worse, and then that just kind of carried over into the entirety of the dungeon on that one. But Sours, let's talk what the big wipes that we were having for both teams going into this one.
I think this one is just the biggest heartbreak of the entire dungeon. Quaking is such a monster affix where everyone's getting positioned to deal with barrel through from Akali, or Aka Ali, and then all of a sudden here comes the Quaking, and they don't do a very good job spreading for it. The Quaking gets cleaved onto the healer, the charge goes through the entire team, and on a 19 Tyrannical, that you can't be cleaving Quaking. That's way too much damage to handle, and the Team D was just taken down.
I haven't seen a bad conga line like that in such a long time here.
I was just going to mention, like, I think during the cast I was mentioning, like, they do such a good job of using their vanishes and their combat drops to make sure that their tank is able to stay in for damage, but not having a vanish there for that particular Quaking is what cost them this map.
Without a doubt here, and we're going to be moving on to Game 2 on the other side of this break, which will be in Freehold. Don't go anywhere, guys. The Mythic Dungeon International will return after this short break. Buff War Nerf Rogue taking Game 1 against Team D in another Bloody King's Rest. And we're moving on to Game 2 here in Freehold. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk right now is Ironic, Nagura, and Sours. And at this point, we're really going to be wanting that bounce back that we saw just from the previous series here, Sours, as we saw Battle for Champion take it not only in King's Rest, but also in the Tol Dagor. We really want to be able to see that bounce back here from Team D.
Yeah, Team D should still be able to get the reverse sweep here, I feel. It's just going to come down to ironing out all the things that really went wrong from the last dungeon. Now, with Raging bolstering Freehold, a lot of random deaths can happen again, like they did in King's Rest, but the trash in general in Freehold is a lot less lethal than it is over in King's Rest.
Yeah, we've had a number of times where just the mass AoE pulls have been able to pull off to such great effect here, Nagura.
Yeah, and I think bolstering especially is just one of these affixes that changes your strategy so much. But Freehold is one of the dungeons where you don't have this huge difference in HP when it comes in with the bolstering, so you can still do some of those bigger pulls because, you know, if they have the same amount of HP, then you're not going to be risking bolstering too much. So I think bolstering is one of the like Freehold is one of the dungeons to have bolstering where it matters the least, I feel like. So they should be able to deal with this one.
Yeah, and I think at this point, if I'm correct on this one's Ironic, we do have Eudora in the rotation, so not only going to be first boss, but second boss as well, going to be very big threats they have to watch out for.
Yeah, Freehold in this tyrannical setting is definitely one of the more, like, the first two bosses are definitely more of the danger bosses. But in this tyrannical setting, one of the things we've seen both of these teams do is run that Unholy Decay in this dungeon. But I don't think you really want to run the Unholy Decay on this bolstering aspect. I don't think it's necessarily plays to the strengths of the class at all.
You know,
Yeah.
you're just going to be having, like, what, mass AoE is kind of asking for larger bolsterings in something where you're not having as much control over the mass AoE on this one.
Yeah.
And you definitely can't pull mobs on top of a boss, right,
Yeah.
with bolstering.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's the main
was their
reason
forte.
why you want to bring no DK.
Yeah, the DK burst is like very front-loaded, so it doesn't really lend itself well to a bolstering where it takes. It's like you can be in combat with trash for a very long time with bolstering, and all the Death Knight damage is done in like a 12-second window, maybe like 5 or 6 seconds into a pull. It's like that's when the DK burst happens, and if everything isn't dead at the end of that, then the DK kind of falls off after that.
Yeah, definitely have to be something to watch for. And like you guys mentioned, no DK on this one, so a bit better target focus to be able to make sure they're avoiding any bolsterings whenever they can. And at this point, it's going to be some of those early pulls too. I mean, we saw almost consistently, Ironic, by all the teams, making sure they're getting reaping into boss right away, not having to wait very long for some of the reaping from the first platform, first little island to travel across the bridge or anything like that.
Yeah, but the thing to remember about that first big pull is it's definitely a lot more dangerous than it normally would be, right? Because pretty much the whole point of that first big pull is to make sure you're killing everything at exactly the same time. So you're killing pretty much all of the reaping at the same time, but that means everything's going to be entering that raging at the exact same time, which means you're going to see a lot of damage going on the tank the second those things pop into raging.
I think we're going to see a lot of running on the side of the tank here. We've seen how many times, I mean, looking at just the live servers for this week, we have to deal with a lot of the quaking and all the other damage that's going out for those. We keep on seeing enforcers being such a huge problem because of the mass reservoir of HP they have, Negra.
Yeah, and we've also seen some other teams having problems with raging in this specific dungeon, as raging was also an affix for the western region. And we saw, for example, Abracadabra just having this huge pull to start, where when all the mobs were raging, we saw the tank go down and just having a full team wipe come in. And especially when you do those huge pulls and then you use a lot of cooldowns, use bloodlust, use offensive cooldowns. If you have a wipe at the very end, it just costs you so much time because all those mobs are going to go back, they're going to reset, and you lost all your cooldowns.
And time is definitely going to be a major factor here as we move on into Game 2 between Team D and Battle Buff War Nerf Rogue here. Team D needing this one to stay in the series.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
You go.
one of the biggest problems with this first pull is what we just mentioned, that it's that raging and bolstering at the same time. So at some point, you're going to have to deal with the raging, and it's probably going to be all at the exact same time. But instantly on the side of Buff War, Nerf Rogue, and Team D, we see completely different pull to what we normally see. Instead of doing that big 22% mob count pull where they pull it into the boss room and proc the reaping wave, they're just opting for a much smaller, safer pull here.
Yeah, we see this very well done by both teams dealing with this crack shot. This crack shot is very hard to move as it constantly casts shoot. That's why we see the tank actually pulling all the mobs on top of the crack shot, making sure they get him low before the tank needs to cut. Because as soon as we get into raging, as soon as we get some of the bolster stacks going out, the tank needs to run. He definitely cannot tank those mobs and can't get hit by them. That's why we see them running around, leaping around, having the Ring of Peace and other CCs coming out from the team to make sure that the tank is just not dying as it's just dropping so low. Now, one more thing to mention is that bolstering not only is dangerous because it can kill your tank or other members, but it also going to cost you a lot of time because it also buffs the HP. So you have to deal with the more HP. So definitely bolstering management, something to watch out for here.
Yeah, so kind of the name of the game here is to make sure you're DPSing down things as evenly as possible. So, for instance, in this pack right now, both of the Enforcers have a lot more HP than the Dogs. So you're going to see the teams making sure they're focusing down the Enforcers more. But like we mentioned, big problem with that is if everything enters raging at the same time, that's 4 mobs hitting for double their damage. Your tank's going to not be very happy, or he's just going to be halfway across the room at that point.
Yeah, and one thing to mention as well, that this is a time trial dungeon, and Team D actually was the #1 seed in this dungeon, being 2 minutes faster than Buff War and Nerf Rogue. So in theory, since we didn't see the strategy of either of those teams coming out, and this is the first time we see Freehold, so in theory, Team D should be winning from their route alone, unless, of course, we see some of those mistakes coming out again, as we've seen in the King's Rest. Now, Buff War and Nerf Rogue are pulling their reaping on top of the boss and popping their bloodlust.
Yeah, and this is definitely a difference. I think this is just definitely sort of a safety play that a lot of teams make. We've seen a lot of teams on this tyrannical Sky Captain Crab encounter. A lot of teams will have players drop incredibly low or just instantly straight up die to that frontal shot ability that he does. If you get hit by 2 of those in a row, you're just going to go straight down. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen in this first phase, but once you get to that second phase, we're going to see these teams going in sort of a little like plus sign square formation around the boss, so they make sure they don't cleave themselves at all.
Yeah, in this first phase here, where the boss is mounted on the bird, you still get shot randomly. It doesn't do as much damage as in the second phase, but you can still get very unlucky and just have the same player get shot multiple times in a row, and that's why we see people drop very low in the first phase. Now, in the second phase, the strategy here is to just have the boss tanked in a corner, have the healers be very far away not to outrange the shot, and to also bait those pulls underground. And we see the melee just kind of making sure they're in somewhat of a square formation, so when the shot comes out, it doesn't actually hit multiple players.
Yeah, and that's the major. That's just pretty much the major mechanic to this fight, of course. Now, at the same time, of course, like you mentioned, occasionally void zones will be dropped on the ground, and that's why we see the healer standing outside of the group so that he can bait as many of those as possible away from the melee group. If only the healer has to move versus all of the melee having to move at the same time, it's just a DPS save for everyone in the group.
Yeah, so this boss, in the past, you were actually able to pull the boss outside of this circle arena and pretty much avoiding the bird completely. As you can see, no, the tank actually getting hit by the bird and almost dying as he procs a Bumsandi trinket here, dropping very, very low. But yeah, so one of those things, the birds, as we can see, they are in the arena. They spawn somewhere at the corner on one of the edges, and they will go straight through on the other side. Now, if you stand outside of the arena, then of course you can't get hit by this ability. And you also can't get hit by those green pulls if you stand outside of the arena. That's why the boss actually got changed. So if you drag the boss outside now, it will immediately despawn. And that's why you see those teams having to tank it inside.
I actually think he did not proc his trinket there. I believe he was below 50%.
Oh,
below,
yeah.
It was below that health threshold to where the 15% health threshold where Treacherous Covenant causes you to take increased damage. So he does still have that cheat death available to him, fortunately for them. That would have been bad if he dropped it right away at the start of the dungeon, because we do know these teams are, even in this bolstering affix, they're still going to be going for some pretty large pulls right after this.
It's still interesting, though, that a tank is playing the Covenant trait, because, of course, if you drop below the threshold, you will actually get increased damage, which is a very interesting thing to choose as a tank. But maybe just because of the damage increase, because it gives him the most damage, maybe that's just the reason why. And maybe he figures, if I'm low HP, I might just die anyway.
Now, we just see Buff War Nerf Rogue accidentally reset the boss, I believe, so they're going to have to do the entire encounter all over again without Bloodlust, which is not ideal. So they're going to be on this tyrannical boss that has increased HP for a lot longer, while Team D just gets to move on to the rest of the dungeon and start pulling as many, the trash pack at their leisure, while Buff War Nerf Rogue kind of labors through this large health pool boss.
Yeah, this is what I've been talking about, right? The boss got changed, so as soon as you drag him outside of this arena anyway, he will reset. So maybe they were tanking too far to the corner, maybe he accidentally made a step too far outside of the arena, the boss reset, so definitely a lot of time lost here for Buff War Nerf Rogue. Now, Team D is already on the next trash pull. As you see, some of the Oatsmen here getting pulled. This is something we haven't really seen before, pull like that. We sometimes see it on live servers, but not so much in the tournament here, as teams usually choose to do larger pulls. But because of this bolstering affix, maybe they choose to just have this different routing here, where they try to pull those equal HP mobs.
Yeah, see, I believe some things, one of the pulls we see a lot of these teams do is they'll pull one of the rat packs into their bigger pulls, which is definitely not a choice you can make on this bolstering week. Those 4 rats that have no HP have a lot less HP than the main rat, so you can't really pull that pack. We do see them pulling it. Again,
it doesn't bolster anymore. They changed the rats.
Changed it.
Right,
okay.
yeah.
Well, my fault on that one. It used to bolster. It doesn't as of maybe a month or so ago. But yeah, they are able to do that pull. Fortunately, it didn't bolster. But if it were bolstering, I was in the right track.
Yeah.
If they did bolster, it'd be a really bad thing. But
Definitely.
They're able to do that kind of pull.
Yeah, so this is the reason. The Trapper still has a lot more HP than most other mobs here. So even if the smaller rats don't bolster, still having this Trapper inside a pull, still have to make sure that you single target focus the Trapper, because it has almost double HP of any of those other smaller mobs. But we definitely see some very nice focus target damage coming in from Team D here, as they really do smaller pulls. We've seen so far they were slow and steady, basically. Now, with bolstering, we've mentioned before, you can't really pull anything on top of bosses. You can't do those huge, double pulls where you pull 20 mobs or so on top of each other, just because it's way too dangerous with bolstering and raging at the same time. So they are pulling this boss here now, and we talked about this. Having it's actually not Eudora at all, as you mentioned before, right?
No, it's not. It's the non-Eudora week. It's the quote-unquote easy week. No Eudora definitely makes this boss a lot easier. But still, these two together, both of them provide massive area of denial mechanics. With the whirlpool of blades on the side of Captain Jolly that you'll have to make sure you're not standing in. And on top of that, the barrel smash from Captain Rule. You can't stand on top of him while he's casting barrel smash, or you'll pretty much take half of your health and damage. So it's definitely not. It's the easiest duo of them to deal with, but it's not easy per se.
Yeah, so what we've seen other teams do in the Western region, because of these brews that you can see on the ground here, they can be positive buffs for your team. It can be haste or crit, so it can be very beneficial to you. That's why we've seen teams in the Western region actually pull trash on top of these bosses. Now, the worst part about having bolstering and tyrannical is that you want to be very fast on trash because you lose so much time on bosses, right? Because they just last so long on a tyrannical setting. But you can't really save much time on trash because bolstering just kind of prevents you from doing anything crazy. You can't do huge pulls, you can't pull mobs on top of bosses. So definitely a lot slower just because of this bolstering effects here.
And we see, I believe, there almost a perfect usage of that nasty debuff brew. It went on both Captain Jolly and Captain Rule at the same time and did probably the last 10% of their health together. That was pretty masterful kiting from the tank there, so good on them for that. Council of Captains goes down before Buff Warner Focus even started pulling the rest of their trash to get to their second reaping wave. Team D's already moved on to the rest of the instance.
Yeah, Team D already 40% trash. Of course, they did pull the reaping wave on top of the boss as they actually pulled the patrol plus the ride pack. So pretty dangerous pull here coming out of them. If they definitely need to make sure that they have proper single target damage here and focus damage on the high HP targets. As we see, the Knuckle Blaster actually being pretty high HP. And we see the Ring of Peace coming out as soon as the mobs go into raging here. So now we see the tank kiting. Because if all of those mobs go into raging at the very same time and then the tank gets hit by all of them, it definitely can just one-shot you. So you want to make sure that you have proper CC management and have your group use your defensives and rotate them properly so the tank has an easier time kiting.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see what they're using for their for their single target focus damage class. It appears to be the Monk. Usually in these focused single target scenarios, you can tell which one of the DPS is kind of taking the backseat to the spam AoE because they're the lowest DPS, generally speaking. They don't spam their AoE, they just kind of focus the highest health target down just to make sure everything is close to the same HP, so bolstering doesn't really have that big of an effect on the pull. And we can see the Monk is sometimes competing, not even competing, they're below the tank in terms of AoE damage. So the Monk is kind of pulling the weight for the group here.
Yeah, definitely have to think about that when you look at damage meters. A lot of times, the person who's number one on the damage meter is not the best player just because he's doing the most damage. It definitely means they just have different kinds of jobs, right? Especially also when you pull Reaping on top of a boss or something like that. Of course, if you have a DK and you pull Reaping on top of a boss, the DK will do a lot more damage than any other player. Not because he's the much better player, just because he's doing this huge AoE burst and the other people actually let the AoE for players. They want to be as efficient as possible. They want to kill everything as fast as possible, no matter who looks the best on the damage meters, right? So if you need to hold back on AoE yourself so someone else can gain single target damage, and that's definitely something those teams are doing.
And we are seeing a big difference in pulls here from what we normally see in this dungeon, purely because of that bolstering affix. Usually we'll see teams be incredibly aggressive with their pulls, moving into Ludwig von Tortolen here. But because he's this mini boss that has such a massive amount of HP, you don't want to bolster him a bunch. You don't want to let that massive HP pool get even bigger. So instead of opting to pull, big trash packs into the turtle and AoEing them down, they opt to just pull 2 mobs on top of them instead.
Yeah, so they're trying to, of course, get both of Ludwig and the 2 trash mobs as low as possible, but Ludwig also rages. So we saw Ludwig just getting very big now. Of course, they do have a raging dispel on the rest of druid, so he needs to make sure that he does dispel the raging on top of those very dangerous targets like Ludwig or other high HP mobs or other mobs that do a lot of damage. As we can see them dealing pretty well with Ludwig and those 2 mobs as they're on 71% trash, while on the other hand, Buff Warrior Rogue just now engaging with the second boss, just now triggering this 40% reaping wave. So I think even if they didn't reset the boss, they still would be behind, definitely. I think Team D just having a much better route here and having a faster run as we, again, just see the Ring of Peace coming out from Team D, from the Windwalker, as all those mobs drop into raging range, and just very good bolstering management by them.
And we can't really reiterate how big of a deal that boss reset was. I'm pretty sure they reset the boss really low in health, probably sub 25%. And if you have to imagine you're dealing with an entirely extra boss when you have to reset a boss and pull it again. So instead of a 4-boss instance, it's now a 5-boss instance. And I mean, there's really no coming back from an entire boss wipe if the other team doesn't make a mistake. Now we do see Team D opting to use their Bloodlust on this 4th Reaping Wave plus Trothak pull.
Yeah, interesting. As we've seen a lot of teams take their Bloodlust for the last boss, but since they can't really pull trash on top of the last boss, they might as well just use it here on Throwback, because Throwback can be dangerous if you pull Reaping on top, because of the sharks mainly. You can see the sharks getting thrown out. Now the sharks will fixate the person that is closest to them. That's why you see Ab, the healer, try to go close and just pick up the sharks on him, so he can kite them through those gray pools on the floor. If the shark goes through the pool, it will be stunned for a second and it will be slower. So that's what we see the rest of it here, just kiting them on the side.
And like you mentioned earlier, this fight is just incredibly dangerous for melee. The Shark Tornado does a lot of damage to anyone in that melee range. In addition to that, the boss will also go to pick up the sharks occasionally, and the way he'll do that is by charging out to the shark pretty aggressively. And if you get hit by that charge, I don't know why you'd be in between the boss and the shark, but if you get hit by that charge, you'll also take a massive amount of damage. So melee need to make sure they're aware of their positioning. They kind of want to be on the opposite side of the boss from the shark. And as long as you do that and you have personals up for the Shark Tornado, you should be fine. But the biggest problem with this fight is that because they're running this triple melee comp, they don't get that much uptime on the boss. Unless they're staying in with a personal for the Shark Tornado, they have to move out, not do any damage, and then move back in every 20 or 30 seconds or so. So I think that's kind of why they opted to use their Bloodlust on this boss, because otherwise it would just be a really long boss encounter, and it still is.
Yeah, thankfully Outlaw Rogues, of course, have a little bit more range than anyone else, so they can still hit the boss while the Shark Tornado is going on. But, you know, actually one of the Rogues was standing too close and actually got hit there, dropping very, very low, as he said. Just a lot of abilities that can be dangerous on this fight. Now, in theory, if you play the abilities correctly, you shouldn't have a problem. But if you stand a little bit too close to the Shark Tornado, or you have a shark getting into melee, somehow hitting a rogue, or you're getting hit by the charge, on top of also, as we said earlier, having the Reaping Wave on top, that's probably just why they wanted to play it safe. Well, on the last boss, of course, you do have the damage increase on the boss, so the longer you're fighting the boss, the more damage it's going to take. And maybe this is why they choose to save it, because raging and bolstering really doesn't affect boss fights, right? We have a lot of other affixes like Grievous and stuff like that that actually affects boss fights, but raging and bolstering does not.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to remember here is that it is a tyrannical aspect. Now, if this was fortified raging bolstering, we'd be over here talking about how dangerous this dungeon is. I mean, it's already still really, the raging bolstering affixes together is already incredibly dangerous just on trash, but adding in that extra health and damage to every trash mob would be pretty nasty. Fortunately, like we mentioned, it's tyrannical, so they don't have to worry about that. But the bosses are still a hefty chunk of HP on that tyrannical setting, even though they don't have those modifiers that make them do more damage. So that's why we still see teams opting to use their Bloodlust there, just to make sure they can eat through that HP pool more effectively.
Yeah, so now Team D is done with the boss fight. They are going to move to the last boss room here as they use their shroud to go past. Now they do have double shrouds, so they can use one to be faster to bridge and then use one more shroud to go past these trash mobs here, unless they choose to do the trash beforehand, which is totally possible. As we mentioned earlier, we have the bolstering affix, so they can't really pull the mobs on top of the boss, so they either have to deal with it before or afterwards. Now we do see a double CC coming in here. Those Ravagers here are actually kind of kill themselves, as they have a cast which is called Painful Motivation. Now this Painful Motivation goes on themselves and 2 more mobs. So this is why we see them kind of splitting up this pool into 2, having one Ravager on the right and one Ravager on the front pool here, just so they make sure that they get the debuff on everyone and doesn't stack on 2 mobs at the same time.
And perfectly pulled off. Both sets of 3 mobs go down instantly. They're at 96%, which means all they'll need to do is kill off 1 or 2 mobs after they deal with the final boss here, Harlan's Suite. Now, Harlan's Suite on Tyrannical, it doesn't really get too dangerous until the final phase. A lot of his mechanics are easily dodgeable or dealt with, so pretty much all we're looking for these teams is to make sure that they're dealing with those bombers as they come in with all of their available CC. On the side of Buff or Nerf, we do see 2 deaths come out on this trash pack. They do get the tank up, but he instantly drops incredibly low again. And I mean, they're already so far behind in the dungeon at this point. If they have another wipe here, I mean, there's no coming back for them, really.
I think what happened is that they pulled a bunch of mobs plus Reaping on top of Ludwig. So it was a very risky pull coming out of Buff Warrior or Broke here. As we just see a full team wipe coming in. They will have to deal with the Reaping again, as they didn't manage to finish all off. That means they will, on the way back, they'll have to pull the Reaping again. They will have to... Thankfully, they did manage to finish off Ludwig, so they don't have to deal with that one. But the rest of the trash they didn't finish off, so just disaster for Buff Warrior or Broke. Of course, Team D is their game to win. They had a very clean run so far, 0 deaths. They only need 4% more trash after dealing with Harlan's Suite here. And as Sarah mentioned, this boss not very dangerous if there's no affixes that make it more difficult, something like Grievous or Explosive. But, you know, Harlan Sweet, not a very dangerous fight in general, as long as you don't get hit by anything.
Yeah, short little cliff notes on the boss here. Phase 1, he does single target abilities where he only picks one person for the mechanic. At 60%, he hops into Phase 2 and targets everyone with every single one of his mechanics. And then at 30%, he hops into Phase 3 where he still targets everyone with all of his mechanics, but he takes double damage and gains 100% attack speed. So we'll see a lot of teams, you know, once you get to Phase 3, they'll just kind of burn the boss down as quickly as possible. But I mean, the thing to talk about here with Team D is we saw them hiccup a lot in that King's Rest. And we have to imagine, like, you know, what... This is similar to what happened in Battle for Champion, where they had a really, really rough King's Rest, but they were able to bounce back and have an incredibly clean second dungeon. But the difference is, of course, that they lost that first King's Rest. They're going to have to do a Game 3 on Tol Dagor, which is a definitely volatile dungeon with the mechanic, with the cannon mechanic, as well as having to deal with that Jess Howless room that we've seen a lot of teams fail at these past weeks.
Yeah, Team D, though, they already showed how good their Tol Dagor is, though, so I feel like they should have the confidence here, especially after just winning this Freehold, which I believe is going to be a straight-up win unless they manage to somehow wipe on this boss 5 times in a row. Then it should be their game to win here. But their mindset should be in a good spot here, as Freehold is their #1 time trial dungeon. They have the fastest time in time trial. They are pulling it off here. Again, 0 deaths, very clean run. So the Tol Dagor showing before it was really good by them. They had a very, I believe, a 17-minute time. So I do believe Team D should have a good mindset here and should go into the last dungeon just having a mindset of winning it. Now, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, of course, they can still win the Tol Dagor. Now, we haven't seen their Tol Dagor yet, and we also don't really, it wasn't a time trial dungeon, so we don't know how good they're going to be. But if they want to win against Team D, they're going to have to pull up a very interesting strategy and a very fast strategy.
Yeah, they definitely can't have any mistakes happening, like resetting bosses in that dungeon, because that will definitely... I don't even know if that's possible in that dungeon. You have to pull the final boss off of the top platform completely. But Team D is able to finish off the last percentage of trash here and prove that they still are one of the best teams in the tournament.
Team D bounces back on Freehold with a very clean execution throughout the dungeon there and tying up the series 1-1 with Buff War, Nerf, Rogue. And talk about that Tol Dagor. That's going to be an incredibly tall task for Buff War, but we haven't seen them yet. Let's talk about that Freehold there, Sours. Very great execution, and this is what we should be expecting from a team that wants to be able to play at a world-class level.
Yeah, from Team D, who was the top team last week, the fact that they were able to do it deathlessly was really impressive showing. This dungeon was almost looking like it could have gone to Buff or Nerf Rogue, but it very quickly fell apart for them. It fell apart for them on the first boss. It fell apart for them before they even got to the second boss, where 2 of their members got bananaed down by this trash, and then so did everybody else. That Frost Blast is taking them out. Well, Team D they plowed through this. They executed the entire dungeon flawlessly. 0 deaths for the entire time. It's only happened, I want to say less than 5 times we've had a true deathless run this MDI, so really good showing out of them.
I really liked at the very end of it, actually, Negro, where they ended up pulling Harlan Sweet right into the double Enforcer pack. It was very brave, but they were already at 3-4% there, so they had the faith that they weren't going to massively bolster the boss before they killed him.
I'm not actually sure if I like that, because they were...
That was very risky.
Risky when they were so far ahead, right? Just bolstering the boss or bolstering the trash and having the tank die or something, especially when I think it was only 40% that they were missing, or 3%.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure why they choose to do it, but they pulled it off. They pulled it off, so.
No, I like it. I think it's like a confidence thing. Like, we need to get our confidence back from that after that first dungeon, so I like what they did there. It's cool.
Without a doubt. Well, before we talk about that, let's go and look at the first boss. I mean, how did this happen? They just got straight birded.
Yeah, they got really birded. It was a foul play from these guys from Buff or Nerf Rogue, where they're doing a nice job maneuvering themselves around the room, and then right out of left field comes a bird, and it knocks both of the rogues as well as the warrior right out of the ring. It comes through the ring, crisscross, gives it a little bop, and then boss runs out, and it's a reset. This is a fairly recent change to the dungeon also, where you used to be able to take the boss a little bit out of the ring in certain spots of the room, and then you could not deal with any of those mechanics, and then that was changed. His play space has been restricted, and if you're not paying attention, that could happen to you.
This is a very extremely tight ring that they got to be watching out for here. But before we go on to Game 3, we will be taking just a short break. Don't go anywhere. Game 3 coming up on Tol Dagor. The series is tied up 1-1 between Buff War, Nerf Rogue, and Team D. As we move on into Tol Dagor, this dungeon has been absolutely lights out here for Tol Dagor, and this one, Sours, is going to be a tall task for Buff War to overcome.
Yeah, Buff War, if they don't int, they can do it. But that's a lot to ask sometimes from a lot of teams, really. And so it's going to really come down to really well executed play throughout the whole dungeon. And they've seen the Team D in this dungeon earlier today, so they know what they're up against. They know how well they have to play. Maybe it's time to kind of, I don't know, pull out all the stops and go crazy in here.
Yeah, so one thing to note as well is that those teams can practice while a tournament is going on. Now, if they're not playing a game currently, they can just hop on the tournament realm, try out some of those strategies, or just repeat dungeons just to get ready for the series. Now, we mentioned that Team D played Tol Dagor earlier, so maybe Buff War Nerf Rogue actually was watching on the second screen and just figured, you know what, there's something they did with a strategy, maybe we want to do that as well. So they could have, in theory, adapted the strategy, or maybe if they already had a faster route, then maybe they're just very confident in that one.
I think the other part of it is they got to watch at where they're being positioned in the bracket. They kind of have to know, okay, we instantly got a bye. We know we're going to be expecting Team D to go up against us here. And if we're going to be able to pull out a Game 3, it's going to be on this map that we really have to prepare for. So this game is going to determine who goes up against Battle for Champion in the upper finals. It's Game 3 between Buff War, Nerf Rogue, and Team D.
Yeah, so Tol Dagor, one of those dungeons where really anything can happen. We've seen very good teams struggle in this dungeon, have full wipes on bosses, have wipes on the very last boss. So definitely a dungeon where you have to watch out for boss fights in general, and just have to watch out for things go wrong on skips and stuff like that.
Yeah, like I think this dungeon is more, it's like the opposite of King's Rest, if that makes any sense, right? King's Rest is this long, arduous dungeon with tons of difficult trash pulls, where if you mess one of them, you go all the way back to the start of the dungeon. Whereas in Tol Dagor, if you mess up one pull, oh, the other team's already at 80% trash count, you lose. It's just such a short, quick dungeon. Any small mistake gets amplified to a huge point. Now, we do already see a difference in that Team D is instantly popping Bloodlust with trash on the boss, just like we saw earlier, whereas Buff War Nerf Rogue has opted to pull no trash with the boss and save their Bloodlust until after the first upheaval.
Is that Team D, one of their rogues actually getting hit by one of those sand traps, so definitely want to make sure that doesn't happen again. Small mistakes like that, where you don't avoid a mechanic or you get hit by something that you shouldn't, can definitely cause wipes here. So want to make sure you avoid those sand traps. If you get hit by them, you do get stunned and you get a lot of damage on you. And as I mentioned, yeah, Buff Warrior, Nerf Rogue, just saving their Bloodlust for the first upheaval when she comes back up, because they're not pulling any trash on top. Now, almost all of the teams so far on the Eastern region did pull trash on top of the first Sand Queen and use their Bloodlust at the very start, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this is a faster strategy because of the cannons later on. As we mentioned, you can just do so much trash with the cannons and do it so fast. So the fact that Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue does not pull any trash on top doesn't mean that their route is going to be slower.
Now, the thing to mention, like we mentioned it a little bit on Desk a little bit, but like Buff War Nerf Rogue is up against a Goliath here in terms of like what they have to deal with. Team D and Tol Dagor, we've seen them so poised and so good. I mean, we talked about their earlier run today where they had a 17-minute 30 time, which is blazing fast. But in addition to that, it was also their Game 3 like cup winning. I tried to put together winning and clinching there. Cup clinching match at the end of the last East Cup. So we know that they're poised in this dungeon. We know how to pull it off. So like, what do you have to do as Buff War Nerf Rogue to beat them in this dungeon? Do you just run your typical strat and hope that Team D messes up? Or do you just, like you mentioned, do you try to do something even more crazy just to try to get an advantage?
Yeah, it's very hard to see into Buff War Nerf Rogue's strategy here because anything could really happen here. They could have just practiced for the King's Rest and Freehold too, right? Because you don't usually want to practice for the third match dungeon unless you actually have it later on in one of your matches as well. Because you want to be confident, right? You don't want to be like, oh, we're probably going to lose this one, so we need to practice the last one. So in case Tol Dagor is actually in their later matches, maybe that's not really something they have worried about too much, especially when they saw Team D just doing so well on broadcast. Maybe they were like, you know what? Team D is so fast in this dungeon, we just going to focus on King's Rest and Freehold. Now, unfortunately, they did lose the Freehold, meaning that they have to win this dungeon if they want to advance. And as we mentioned, Team D is having such a clean strategy here. So if if they're not making any mistakes, it really should be Team D's game to win here.
Now, we do already see both teams killing the first boss within 2 seconds of each other. The major difference, of course, being that Team D does have that 12% extra mob count. Now, we do know that 12% mob count in this dungeon doesn't really add up to much, right? It adds up to the tank having to go a little bit further back inside the dungeon to pull stuff to the cannons. But they do need a certain amount of percentage, right? There's only so much in that top room that you can pull to the cannons efficiently. So we usually see teams getting between 20 and 30% mob count before they go to the cannons.
Yeah, we see both teams being in this area here where you want to open the prisons here and decide to get the buffs. We actually see, I think those... Oh, no, never mind. My bad. I thought it was a mispull coming in from Team D here, but they're already in the upper room because they were actually doing the script so fast. As Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, we were still stealthing past, opening those prisons to get the buffs. Team D just kind of blazed through this area already on the Jess Howless floor, dealing with the mobs here. Now, the buffs, as we've spoken about earlier, you can get a little bit unlucky or you can get lucky with the buffs, as usually they only open the right side prisons, and it can be RNG which buff you get, but you definitely want attack power because of this full melee group. So if the attack power buff is not on the right side, then of course you're gonna lose against a team that has the attack power buff.
Now, we have seen, I believe, some teams actually go and sacrifice one of their, a few seconds just to make sure they get that attack power buff, which is a little bit unfortunate. There's not a whole lot you can do about that. It is a random spawn. So if you do get attack power on the left, like we saw earlier today, I believe Team D did sacrifice the rogue to get the attack power buff for the team, because it is that big of a deal, right? It's a full extra attack power buff, which already stacks with the warrior buff, so they get double the benefit from that.
Yeah, so Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, they are behind in trash percentage as Team D already had their first reaping wave. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue still dealing with this C-Speaker pack. Now, of course, you want to be careful with those kind of pulls. In the Jess Howless room, there are some dangerous mobs. The Water Dome specifically needs to be interrupted, because else the whole group is going to have an Absorb shield, especially because they're all playing Alliance, right? Now, on the Horde side, Blood Elves, of course, have this AoE Dispel, so if a Water Dome goes through, no problem, you just use one of your Blood Elf abilities. If another one goes through, well, you just use the other Blood Elf ability. But, of course, they're playing Alliance, so they don't have this mass spell available to them, so they want to make sure they interrupt as much as possible, as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue does pull their first reaping wave on top of the boss.
And I think we mentioned this earlier today already. They have to make sure that they finished all of this reaping wave before they phase the boss at 70%, because when the boss phases at 70%, he casts Smoke Bomb, which stuns everyone in the group for 6 seconds. So if there's still reaping mobs alive, putting this stacking reaping debuff on the tank, your tank will just go down to the debuff. So good on them. They definitely clear up all of that trash, except for one lost soul, who isn't necessarily going to kill everyone in the group. But they are able to just barely I mean, we see them all get stunned, and all three of the DPS get hit by that debuff, which reduces their max health and reduces their damage done. So they are going to be a little bit slower here, but because he's running around releasing all these prisoners from the cage, they're only going to have a few seconds of that debuff left, excuse me, by the end of this run here.
You see, Team D is still working on that trash. Now, I did not see wrong actually earlier, so they were not in the Jess Howless room. They were still one floor below, actually dealing with the trash one floor below, which we don't usually see. Usually in the floor with the prison, with the buffs, we see teams just skipping the trash, while Team D actually chose to deal with the trash. And now they are, of course, in Jess Howless room, while Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue already working on Jess Howless here, as the... We talked about this boss before. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, especially if you miss some of those interrupts.
Yeah, and of course, the thing about Bobby Howless is he'll also mirror some of the mechanics that Jess Howless does. He'll also cast that Howling Fear, which needs to be interrupted. In addition to that, he will stun one of the players and start channeling on them, and he will channel on them until he's interrupted as well. So we definitely have to make sure the teams are spreading out their interrupts properly here, not overlapping any of them. Otherwise, a fear will go off, or one person will be perma-stunned.
Yeah, we see Bobby Howless actually just running off here, which he sometimes does. Now, the dangerous part about Bobby running off is that he can cast his fear ability while being out of range for any sort of interrupt. So that's the dangerous part, where you want to make sure that you position yourself properly, because the fear... Oh my god, they almost had the tank dying here, because Bobby was stunning the tank and no one interrupted it for a second there. But they managed to get the interrupt out, the tank got out of the stun, and they didn't manage to recover. But yeah, so you want to make sure that you line of sight the fear from Bobby if he's running away and no one is in range for the interrupt.
And boss number 2 going down for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue as they move on to the most awesome part of the dungeon, the cannons. We're just going to see them pulling pretty much as much trash as they possibly can into the cannons, grouping it all up with ring of peace and knockbacks, and having the rogues go to town with the cannons.
Yeah, we see Shadow Melt skip coming in here. While we see the CC coming through here, so everyone can run past. Now the important part here is that the rogues go up to the cannons and getting the tricks on the tank. So we saw the tricks coming out on the tank while the rogues run off to the cannons. The tank is pulling all this trash in this room together. So a huge pull coming in here. Now, of course, as long as the tank doesn't die while pulling the mobs, it should not be a danger anymore because, of course, now the cannons are going to deal with this. Now, the important part here is making sure that the cannon needs as few shots as possible to kill the trash, because the few shots you need, the more efficient you're gonna be. This is why we see a lot of those CC abilities coming in, like the Ring of Peace, like the Vortex from the Druid and the Typhoon, to make sure the mobs are as stacked as possible so the heavy cannon hits all of the mobs with one of the shots.
And we see in the space of about 20 seconds there, all that mob count increase benefit that they had on the side of Team D is gone. They have been surpassed and almost already 11% ahead just because of the power of this cannon. Now, of course, the cannon also does work on the reaping mobs that spawn too, so we'll see them use the cannon on that as well. And there's really no danger to this strategy because of the way they use these rogues here. Rogues have an ability called Tricks of the Trade that they can cast on a party member that redirects all threat and aggro they pull on mobs to their targets. So what we'll see rogues do is they'll Tricks of the Trade on their tank, which will redirect all of their cannon damage aggro to the tank, so that instead of attacking the rogue in the cannon, they'll attack the tank, which makes sure that the rogue inside the cannon is completely safe.
Yeah, one thing to note, they actually have a bomb here going off. The rogue is going to get hit by it. Oh, okay, he did get hit by it, he didn't die. But also was like quaking on top of that. But yeah, so you want to make sure that if you're in the cannon, you're not immune to damage, right? So anything that will damage you outside of the cannon will also damage you inside the cannon. So you want to make sure that if there's a reaping circle underneath you, or there's a bomb as we've just seen, that you go out of the cannon and make sure you're fine, or you use something like a defensive pull-out on the rogue. Now, one thing to note as well here, that their cannon part is a little bit slower as we've seen from Team D before, because the second rogue didn't actually walk into the far cannon until they were dealing with the 60% reaping wave. Now we do see the rogue actually being in the right side cannon too, having this kind of double cannon setup where you have one rogue in the left cannon, one rogue in right cannon. But they were waiting for it quite a while, so not the fastest cannon part we've seen from Buffalo or Nerf rogue here.
We also see Team D now finally moved on to the cannon after dealing with the second boss, Jess Hallis. And we're going to see them almost instantly shoot up to around, if I remember properly, 85% trash. They started at 44%. They're now instantly at 60, proccing their third reaping wave of the dungeon. They still have a lot more to go, but their tank does go down. Once again, he was just standing there getting hit in the back, which is just really unfortunate. He does take the battle risk, so he is still there. We know that, as a matter of fact. So he did not DC. But the healer as well going down just to having aggro. After the fact, this is a disaster for Team D.
Definitely. We saw the tank going down. This means the healer had all the aggro from the mobs. Of course, there's a bunch of ranged casters in these trash pulls. And we mentioned before, Team D just does this insane pull on the very first cannon part, where if the tank dies, it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be the rogues having aggro, it's going to be the healers having aggro. And even when the rest went through, it was just too little too late. Now, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, super clean run so far. Still 0 deaths, 91% trash, which is exactly the amount of trash they need before they get into the next cannon area. Now, they do have their Bloodlust available, but of course they want to save it for the last boss. And it is the most dangerous boss in this dungeon, especially with Quaking.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. We mentioned earlier, and we're gonna have to mention it again, how dangerous that last boss is on this Quaking FX. Like, it probably matches up with some of those King's Rest bosses on Quaking just in terms of how much damage your group is taking. But in that sense, this dungeon is not necessarily over yet. Buff or Nerf Rogue has to make sure they're dealing with both of these bosses incredibly cleanly, with no deaths. And, I mean, if they do happen to have a wipe, Team D is right back in this, and they're probably in the lead.
Definitely. We've seen teams wipe to the last boss before, right? So Team D definitely still has a chance to win here. They're not out by any means. They're already on 70, or already procced their 80% reaping wave, so they're not far off at all to reach this third boss here, Valeri. Now, Valeri, we've talked about a lot before. Really not the most dangerous fight in this instance. I do believe it's the easiest out of all 4 bosses here. Now, I don't think we've seen anything really go wrong for any of the teams here, because the only really difficult mechanic that you have to deal with here is those barrels, as you have to move them out of the Cinder Flame, because the Cinder Flame will actually ignite the barrels, and then you have these huge explosions, the huge circles coming out. This is why you see all the barrels just kind of being stacked in one area. Now, if the Cinder Flame will actually ignite them, then of course the whole group can just walk on the other side of the room.
At the same time, we do see the final and probably last battle res being used on the side of Team D as they do finish up the rest of the trash percentage. They are at 98%, so they won't have to do anything except for deal with one mob after they deal with both bosses. But when we talk about Knight Captain Valyria, like you mentioned, this boss is pretty much figured out, right? We'll see the teams doing the exact same strategy. Move the Knight Captain into the middle of all the barrels as they spawn. When she starts casting Cinder Flame at one of the barrels, you just move that barrel so it doesn't get lit on fire. And then once you've done that, you can stack all the barrels up in a nice little pile, and then you can just let them explode, because if they're all stacked together, you'll definitely have a safe spot somewhere in the room. So we've seen them do that over and over again. All the teams have the exact same strategy on this boss because it is just figured out.
Yeah, so Team D actually proccing their 100% reaping. Now, I do believe their trash percentage got messed up a little bit because they were pulling, or they had to deal with the trash in the prison room or in the prison area earlier, where I thought they were actually in Jess Howless' room. Now, they probably didn't have the CC come out properly, or someone else was somehow in combat, so they had to deal with the mobs in this room, which was a mistake. Therefore, they do have too much trash percentage here. Now, they also have one death, but as soon as they're out of combat, they can rest the player back up. And Buffwar and Nerf Rogue, just dealing with the last percentage here, probably also dealing with the reaping wave before they go to the last boss, or just shadow melting it, right? That works as well, as we see the wardens go down their stairs, which is the last percentage they need.
Yep, and they will, like you mentioned, this will be their last reaping wave, this will be the rest of their trash percentage, and they'll just have to move up to the final boss room, shadow meld that trash off, and then this dungeon is entirely in their hands. All they have to do is deal with the final boss. Now, like you mentioned, we have seen teams unable to rise to the occasion in this dungeon, unfortunately, when they have the opportunity to finish the dungeon off. So we'll have to see if Buffwar Nerf Rogue is able to do that here.
Yeah, so this last boss court was the bane of the healers. Now, healers have a really hard job here in this fight because of these explosive bursts. Now, there's other things that can go wrong on this fight, not only the explosive burst, but the explosive burst is the one thing we should be watching out for, and it's the one thing where the whole team can just get unlucky with those doubles that we keep explaining to you guys. Now, you want to make sure that you keep an eye on the healing meter as well as the boss gets engaged, and as you know, we might see some doubles, especially when you get the quaking on top as well.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about this, we can't mention it enough. This is a healing intensive encounter. So as with all healing intensive encounters, the really impressive thing is not the fact that the healer is able to heal through it. I mean, pretty much all of these healers in this tournament should be able to heal through it. That's why they're here. It's the fact that they're going to be able to do a lot of damage while doing so. Now, we do see Marito dropping incredibly low to the quaking plus the explosive blast plus the debuff on top of that also gets placed after the explosive blast when he has one of those Azerite round buffs on himself. But like we mentioned, easily healable through as long as you're playing properly. Sometimes quaking mechanics can mess you up a little bit, but you have the cheat deaths to back that up.
I wouldn't say easy, really. But yeah, definitely those healers should be able to heal it, as they're of course the best healers in this tournament that are qualifying here. So they should be able to heal through it. But of course, you know, as I said, you can get unlucky if you get, let's say you get 2, 3, 4 doubles in a row. Then then it's very dangerous. And then if you get bad quaking timing, that's definitely something that can completely mess up a whole pool, no matter how good you are. If you run out of defensive cooldowns and you keep getting those doubles, then it's going to be a problem. Now, the one thing to watch out for the doubles is you got to watch for the big, what is it called? The Dead Eye cast, sorry. The Dead Eye cast is kind of resetting. As you see Loda actually going down here, this will be a full wipe coming in, as they don't have a battle rest here, so they will have to try to reset the boss, because they are not going to be able to finish the boss off without the Rasta Druid. Now, of course, the Rasta Druid, the only one with the rest, so even if they do have 2 battle rests available, it's not going to be helping.
The next thing I was going to mention the second you were finished was like, all eyes on Loda here, it's all on him. He's the only one that has to stay alive because he can battle res his teammates, but he goes down, and that's a full wipe for them. And we see that Team D already has a trash percentage, and they're finishing off Knight Captain Valyria here, so they're able to go up to the boss. And the major difference here, 3 deaths, 15 seconds on the board for Buffwar that they have But the thing is, Team D has Bloodlust available. So this is just going to be a DPS race at this point, as long as they can do the skip properly on the side of Team D.
Definitely, this can still be Team D's game to win here. As you mentioned, they have the Bloodlust. Now, they don't have a Battle Rest, right? So they need to somehow make sure that they don't have a single death on this last boss fight. But I kept mentioning, right? They got a couple of doubles on Buff Warriors, Nerf Rogue side. They had bad Quaking, and Loda just didn't manage to heal them up. Now, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue already engaging last boss fight. Now, Team D also pulled it, so they're not far behind, and they do have the Bloodlust coming up here. So all eyes on those two healers who need to make sure they're gonna keep the group alive, and they also want to make sure they do as much damage as possible, because everything matters at this point as they're so close.
It's all eyes on the damage meters and the boss's HP at the bottom of each team's screen. Team D has popped their Bloodlust, and even though they pulled the boss 10 seconds later, they have already caught up to and now overtaken Team Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. It's all going to be about those deaths. I mean, if Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has those 2 extra deaths, those matter at this point. If their healer goes, if either of these teams' healers goes down, it's over for that team, unless, you know, the other team also counter throws. But it's just a straight up DPS race at this point.
Yeah, so of course Team D 15 seconds behind at this point because of those 3 extra deaths. And we see, look at the HP of the boss, it's completely even between those two. So if Team D doesn't pump more damage and we don't see a little bit more coming out of them, the Bloodlust is over at this point, right? So if they don't increase their damage, it's going to be Buff Warrior and Nerf Rogue that are going to win because of those 3 extra deaths.
We see Long dropping incredibly low, but not quite proccing his cheat death trinket, so he's going to be fine. We see everyone dropping incredibly low in addition to Quaking on the side of Buff Warrior and Nerf Rogue, but they're all just barely alive. Lazarus dropping to 1% HP from that incendiary debuff from the explosive blast. This is neck and neck here. This is crazy.
Well, Team D actually caught up on boss percentage at this point because Buff Warrior and Nerf Rogue, they dropped so low that they had to play defensive, right? And as soon as you're in defensive mode, as soon as you're trying to survive, you're just going to do less damage. Now, Team D 1-2% ahead in boss damage, so 15 seconds still not going to be it, though. They have to catch up a little bit more, but this is super close between those two teams.
Neither of the cheat deaths available for either of the rogues on Buff Warrior and Nerf Rogue, so we'll have to keep an eye on both of them here as both of them get targeted by the explosive blast casts. In addition to that, Marito dropping incredibly low with the incendiary debuff, and they get a double. Can they keep the rogue alive here? It'll be incredibly close. He does, it looks like he does use his, immunity to make sure they take damage, but they do. Oh, we do have a death on the side of Team D, and they don't have a battle rest.
I think Epic's gonna die. They got a double too. Okay, Epic's gonna die. This is a full wipe from Team D as well. They did have a battle rest available for the Windwalker, but they just got a double explosive burst. Ep dropped solo. He didn't manage to top himself up before the extra one went through, and they're gonna have its full team wipe here coming in. As Buff Warrior and Nerf Rogue actually just dropping solo too. We talk about this. This boss is just so dangerous, especially with Quaking, especially if you get those doubles. And again, this is gonna be a double again for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue because they got the explosive burst after the dead eye. So now Loda needs to heal him up before the second one because we can see it coming in right now. The Windwalker is dying, and we see everyone just dropping, so it's still 18%. We see another death coming in, and the tank on 1% HP. If the tank dies here with the Quaking as well, this might just be a full wipe on Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue side as well.
Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, you've been given a second lease on life. Don't throw it away here. Save that battle race for the everyone goes down once again. Team D has a chance to get back in this tournament now. The deaths are pretty much even. It's 13-12. These teams are having to deal with, I mean, we talked about it, so how dangerous this boss is with Quaking, and now Team D is, they're ahead. They get to pull the boss first with only a 5-second difference in deaths.
This is so crazy. It was like Buff Warrior and Nerf Rogue were so far ahead. They should have been the one winning, but now they wiped twice on this last boss. And Team D also having the wipe coming in. Now at this point, Team D, as you said, just fighting the boss first. They both do not have Bloodlust ready though. And without Bloodlust, this boss is just, it takes so long. And at some point, the healer is going to be out of mana. At some point, you might get unlucky, get a couple of explosive burst doubles, and you can just wipe again. So you definitely want to look out for the explosive. As we see Team D getting another double cast. They're just having so bad RNG and also get a Quaking on top of it, but they didn't manage to recover. But this probably cost them a lot of defensive cooldowns here, as they had the double plus Quaking. So now, if they're unlucky again, then they're probably out of defensives.
I mean, we even see the Vivify cast coming out of U-Monk just to help that healer mana bar stay alive, because all it costs for the Monk is to use a little bit of his energy to heal himself up or heal anyone in the group up. So just good heads-up team play from him, probably knowing they're a little bit ahead and they were able to pull that boss first. They are about 15% ahead on the boss, which in this tyrannical setting can equate to about 20-25 seconds. So as long as they stay the course, they have that same damage increase ahead of the other team. They should win this dungeon, but I mean, it's not easy enough to say that. 2 times already this dungeon, we've said that all the team has to do is finish the boss off.
No,
and on the side of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, 2 deaths on their board, and they only have 1 battle res, so they have to reset this boss. They just have to hope that Team D will do exactly what they did in Wipe.
Okay, all eyes on Team D here. If they manage to finish up this boss without any wipes, it's definitely going to be their game to win here, as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has a full team wipe coming in again. Now, this boss fight is just so dangerous, and I feel like Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has been pretty unlucky. They got so many doubles, they got so many bad quaking timings. It's just such a shame to see for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. But now, all eyes on Team D. Now, can they get good RNG with explosives? Watch out for this Deadeye cast. If it's an explosive, it's going to be a double. Okay, and there we go. It's a double. So let's see if App can actually heal away this damage here.
This is going to be an incredibly dangerous portion of the fight, like you mentioned. The first explosive burst coming out. Here comes the second one. It looks like everyone is just about healthy enough to deal with it, so they should be totally fine. As long as they can deal with those doubles for the rest of the fight, they're going to be just fine. Only 28% left of boss HP to go as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue engages Overseer Korgus for a 4th time. It's just unfortunate on their side here.
Okay, so Team D this time not getting a double, thankfully. They didn't have the explosive burst after the Deadeye cast. But at this point, you gotta mention, right? They don't have the bloodlust, so their single target DPS is just gonna be lower. That means the longer the boss fight lasts, the more mana the rest of it needs to heal away this damage, especially if you get unlucky. So as the boss drops lower, App is gonna go lower in mana, and we see just those explosive bursts doing so much damage to the whole group. Now you can be double RNG'd here in this boss, actually, as we see another double coming in. Now, not only can you get a double explosive burst, but you can also be unlucky by getting it on the same people, because App will always get it because he's a range, but the other one can get RNG'd. As we see Korgus be on 2%, and it should be Team D's game to win here on this very close Tol Dagor.
A shockingly close Tol Dagor at the very end there, and somehow after an incredible stream of wipes, Team D takes Tol Dagor. In many ways, I'm just lost for words there. This was not Team D's game to win. They played pretty poorly at the start. They even ended up altering their route from what we previously saw here, and then they still take the win here, Sours.
Yeah, I thought Team D was like, okay, they're doing the right thing. They're pulling trash with boss 1. That's the efficient play. That's what you're supposed to do. And then they got to 44% count in the dungeon before the second boss, which is completely unnecessary because you can get all the count you need with the cannons. And I was like, okay, they've thrown this dungeon. I guess they wanted to go to the lower bracket, so that's too bad. That's all she wrote for Team D, but that wasn't the case here, where Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue having 2 full wipes on the last boss is, what can you do? You can't see that coming. Like, it looked like they were ahead. They were so ahead when Captain Valyri died. I was like, okay, they're like a full boss ahead. Like, they finished up with cannons, and then it was just a complete and utter fiesta. Doubles, quaking. Like, quaking is a ridiculous affix. It does, I think, honestly, I can say that it does too much damage, this expansion. 20% of your health with healer throughput this expansion is absurd. It is brutal. And on a boss like this that's doing so much damage, especially on a 19 Tyrannical, it can be very hard to recover, almost impossible.
That's an interesting challenge, as you mentioned, for healer throughput, especially as we moved into the second tier of this expansion. They gave a very large amount of stamina to Azerite gear to further scale up HP to compete against rising healer power here. So interesting that they have to be fighting against that, since the Quaking are going to be dealing more damage to them. As a result, you have to heal up more. But then Nagura, I mean, you hammered it on that one. Korgus' damage a lot of times can just be completely random.
Definitely, it's just this RNG coming in. Not only do you get the double explosive sometimes, but you also get the quaking in between. And we mentioned the damage of quaking, right? But it also interrupts your cast. So as a restorer, you only have this amount of time, you only have those many instant casts, right? You have your HOTS, which are instant, but you also need to cast regrowths, which can be interrupted. And other than that, you only really have Smithman, and it has a long cooldown, so...
Very nasty to be able to seeing that, but we did get a winner in it, and another dungeon has claimed both teams without a doubt. Now, we were going to be having our final match of the day in the lower quarters here, but unfortunately, due to some of the systematic issues with connections for the Oceanic servers, we are not able to have full screen to be able to connect. In fact, after their first series, they started experiencing those connection issues and were not able to log on to the tournament realms at all. So for the interest of tournament integrity, that game is going to be postponed until tomorrow, so we will still see them play up against Sun Sky and be able to potentially move on throughout the series. But we wanted to make sure that we were giving them an opportunity to make sure that the internet connection issues were going to be stabilized. So starting tomorrow,